I want you to do something for me right now. Just pause whatever you're doing and take a look at your immediate environment. Maybe you're sitting in a desk chair, feeling the solid plastic against your back. Or maybe you're gripping the steering wheel of your car.
Right. Or holding a warm coffee mug.
Yeah, exactly. The ceramic coffee mug. I want you to really feel the weight of it. Feel that absolute indisputable solidity of the object. Feel the boundary where your hand ends and the object begins. It feels incredibly real, doesn't it? I mean, it feels like an absolute fact of the universe that you are one independent thing, and that chair or that steering wheel is another completely separate thing.
It is, hands down, the most convincing experience in the human repertoire. We are biologically hardwired to, trust that sensation of separation implicitly.
But what if I told you that entire sensation is a cognitive fabrication? What if literally everything you think of as solid, stable, and permanent in your life, your identity, your daily problems, the physical boundaries of the room you're sitting in, and even the strict passage of time, what if all of that is actually an elaborate, incredibly heavy linguistic illusion?
It's a huge question.
Right. What if, when you strip away the neurological processing tricks and the conceptual overlays, you aren't actually a noun at all? What if you were actually a verb masquerading as a noun?
Yeah, that is the ultimate glitch in the human operating system. We spend our entire lives utterly convinced that we are solid, permanent objects navigating through a universe populated by other solid, permanent objects. We think reality is like a room full of furniture.
Right.
But when you look under the hood of human cognition, you realize that reality is actually a fluid, centerless, deeply interconnected process.
I'm going to be honest. That idea makes me feel like the floor just dropped out from under me. And that is exactly why today's deep dive into these sources is going to be so fundamentally mind-bending. Our mission today is to map out the exact architecture of perceived reality.
And it's a very specific architecture.
Exactly. Based on the stack of philosophical frameworks and cognitive science papers we've been reviewing, we are going to explore how you and I actively co-create our world. We are taking a magnifying glass to the way the human mind takes a limitless, centerless, flowing river of existence and forcefully imposes these incredibly simplistic artificial models onto it.
Yeah, the central dilemma we're unpacking today is often referred to in these sources as the disease of reification.
The disease of reification.
Right. Reification basically means treating something that is abstract, fluid, or purely conceptual, as if it were a concrete, independent, physical thing. We generate dualistic concepts and models to help us navigate the flow of reality, and that part is totally normal.
We need them, right?
We do. The trap is that, after a while, we completely reify everything. We forget that our concepts are just mental shorthand. We start fiercely believing that our artificial models are the absolute, objective reality.
So I want to make sure we ground this right away, because we aren't saying these models are totally useless or that the world is a giant, meaningless hallucination. We have to give a massive caveat here. Our conceptual models are relatively valid.
Right. Relative validity is key here.
Meaning we can test them. We use these models to build suspension bridges, formulate vaccines, and quite frankly, they keep us from wandering into traffic, so they have conventional validity. But the crux of today's exploration is that while these models are highly functional, they are never reality as it actually is.
And if we really want to understand how we co-create this illusion, we can't just start with high-level philosophy. We have to start with the meat computer inside our skulls.
The brain.
Yeah, we have to look at the biological and cognitive glitch that forces us to see solid boundaries where none actually exist, and that requires a quick trip back into evolutionary biology.
Well, make it make sense, because when I hold my coffee cup, my brain screams that it is a solid, independent object. Why does my brain lie to me so convincingly?
It lies to you because if it didn't, your ancestors would have been eaten.
Well, that's blunt.
It's the truth. The human visual cortex and our higher reasoning by extension evolved a mechanism known as edge detection. Imagine you are a biological creature navigating a savanna tens of thousands of years ago. Survival is your only metric.
Okay, I'm on the savanna.
To survive, you need the ability to instantly, almost reflexively, draw a hard, absolute boundary between a predator and the surrounding environment. You need to isolate the shape of the tiger from the pattern of the tall grass in a fraction of a millisecond.
So my brain isn't concerned with the profound ultimate truth of the universe. It's just concerned with not becoming lunch.
Exactly that. I mean, if your primitive brain sat there appreciating the seamless, interdependent, centerless tapestry of the savanna ecosystem,
Just vibing with the grass.
Right, recognizing that the tiger, the grass, the wind, and your own body are just a single continuous exchange of energy and atoms, you'd be dead before you finish the thought. Edge detection is a ruthless, highly efficient biological software program designed solely for survival.
But the problem, according to our sources, is that this biological software went into overdrive.
Huge overdrive.
We took a survival mechanism meant for spotting predators, and we turned it into our entire philosophical foundation for how the universe works.
That biological necessity of edge detection fundamentally tricks our higher reasoning. It forces us to project absolute independent boundaries onto a universe that is, in reality, a seamless fractal flow. We take the tool of edge detection and apply it to our emotions, our relationships, our sense of time, and our very identity.
And the sources we're reviewing use some incredibly evocative language to describe this process, don't they? They talk about how we just, quote, add designation to the flow of existence.
Add designation, yeah.
Like we're just walking through a constantly shifting, fluid environment with a label maker, slapping stickers on processes and pretending we've captured their essence.
That is a brilliant way to picture it. We constantly slap a label on a dynamic process and declare it a static thing. The text suggests that we take something inherently fluid and we mentally freeze it into a solid, independent, absolute entity.
Mentally freeze it.
Yeah, the imagery used is of someone standing in a rushing river, desperately trying to freeze the river of reality into solid blocks of ice so they have something firm to stand on.
Completely ignoring the fact that humans are perfectly capable of swimming.
Exactly.
We just panic because we want solid ground. We want permanence where there is only flow. It reminds me of the phrase confusing the map for the territory or eating the menu instead of the meal. We get so obsessed with the artificial boundaries we've drawn that we hallucinate concrete reality where there is only process.
And this craving for certainty is deeply embedded in our psychology. The sources provide a fascinating modern metaphor to explain this specific craving, the X-ray machine.
Oh, right, the X-ray metaphor.
Think about how we approach a medical crisis. We possess a desperate, almost pathetic craving for reality to be binary. When you hurt your arm, you want an X-ray. You want the reality of your body to be as clear, absolute, and undeniable as a jagged white fracture on a black film.
It's either broken or it's not broken.
Right. We want a definitive diagnosis from the universe. We want the universe to draw a sharp line for us.
But the universe doesn't deal in sharp lines, does it?
No, it deals in gradients, relations, and continuous processes. To maintain the illusion of the sharp line, the brain works incredibly hard. And this brings us to one of the most mind-blowing cognitive phenomena discussed in the research, something called saccadic masking.
Okay, I loved this part of the notes because it perfectly illustrates the glitch we were talking about. Explain how saccadic masking works.
So saccadic masking is a physical process happening in your eyes and brain right now. When you look around the room, your eyes do not pan smoothly across the environment like a high-end cinema camera on a track.
They don't?
No. Instead, your eyes make incredibly rapid, jerky, microscopic darting movements. These are called saccades. If your brain actually processed the visual data during those rapid movements, your daily life would look like a dizzying, nauseating blur. You would be constantly seasick.
So what does the brain do?
It literally shuts off your visual processing during the movement.
Wait, really? It turns off?
Yeah, it blinds you for a fraction of a second, takes a static snapshot of point A, takes another static snapshot of point B, and then your mind physically stitches those separate static snapshots together in post-production. It completely hallucinates a smooth, continuous video feed.
That is terrifying and fascinating at the same time.
It really is. Your smooth perception of the room right now is a cognitive editing trick covering up a series of frozen snapshots.
So the continuity of my vision is literally an illusion hiding the jerky, fragmented reality of my eye movements. And if I'm understanding the research correctly, the texts argue that we do the exact same thing conceptually.
We do. We take tiny conceptual snapshots of the flowing river of reality. A moment of anger, a fleeting interaction with a friend, the temporary sensation of holding a steering wheel, and we stitch them together to hallucinate a solid, permanent, continuous self and a solid, permanent world.
We hide the constant interconnected flux of reality behind a smooth, edited projection.
Exactly.
You know, hearing all of this, it sounds absolutely exhausting. I think about my own daily life getting frustrated at a self-checkout machine because it won't scan my barcode. I treat that machine as an inherently evil, independent entity that is actively choosing to ruin my day.
Right, you're projecting onto it.
I'm projecting malice onto a temporary arrangement of metal, plastic, and boogie code. It's like we are constantly running an incredibly heavy background app on our internal operating systems. It's draining all our battery 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just to build and maintain these invisible walls everywhere we look.
The maintenance of that illusion is the root of our cognitive exhaustion. We are constantly propping up what the philosophical sources call the invisible mannequin.
Okay, unpack the invisible mannequin for me, because this metaphor really clarified how aggressive our minds are when it comes to constructing reality.
The invisible mannequin is a way to describe how we fabricate the core essence of objects. When we experience reality, our minds automatically hallucinate a foundational core. Let's use the example of buying a new car.
Buying a car.
When you go to a dealership, what are you actually experiencing? You are experiencing the visual data of red paint. You are experiencing the tactile sensation of smooth metal and the smell of leather. You are feeling the heat of the engine.
Yeah, sensory inputs.
Right. Those are all just passing properties, constantly changing based on the lighting, the temperature, and your own senses.
But my brain doesn't say, oh, what a lovely collection of temporary sensory data. My brain says, that is a car. Capital C.
Exactly. Because we cannot handle the idea that these properties, redness, smoothness, heat, are just floating there in a relational web of cause and effect, so we subconsciously invent an invisible mannequin to hang those clothes on.
We invent a core.
We dress this fabricated mannequin up in the clothing of solidity, extension in space, and redness, and then we mistakenly believe that the mannequin itself, the underlying carness, possesses some independent, absolute existence.
We invent the mannequin to have something to hang the clothes on. That is so wild. We invent a foundational core because the alternative, that reality is just centerless flowing properties, is too terrifying for our edge-detecting brains to process.
And because our brains are hardwired to draw these arbitrary boxes around everything, we don't just do it with physical objects like cars. We aggressively chop the entire seamless, centerless karmic flow of reality into rigid grammatical structures. We force the limitless universe into a strict artificial diet of nouns and verbs.
Which perfectly transitions us into the sheer scale of this illusion. In the notes, this is referred to as the triadic delusion, the idea that we slice the centerless fractal of reality into 3 distinct pieces. I found this part staggering because it shows how this glitch infects literally every domain of human experience.
It is entirely pervasive. The philosophical frameworks we are drawing from argue that in every single domain of life, our mind divides the limitless karmic flow into 3 discrete spheres: a subject, an action, and an object.
3 spheres.
We take a unified process and violently chop it into 3 stable, independent things. And the sources actually map this out across 11 different chapters, covering almost every facet of reality.
Let's actually walk through that, because I need to ground this. Otherwise, it just sounds like abstract grammar.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how this plays out across those 11 chapters. How do we hallucinate these borders in real time?
Let's start with Chapter 1, Causality. Think about a game of pool. You see the cue ball roll across the felt and strike the 8 ball, sending it into the corner pocket. What your brain registers is an independent cause, the cue ball.
That's the subject.
Right. Then the mechanism of causality, the physical strike, that's the action. And the effect, the 8 ball moving, which is the object. You divide the flow of energy into a producer, a production, and a product.
And I assume my brain thinks those are 3 totally separate solid things. The cue ball exists entirely on its own, the hit is an event, and the 8 ball is its own entity.
Exactly. And we do the exact same thing in Chapter 2, which covers motion. When you see someone walking down the street, your brain isolates a goer, the person. Then the act of going, the physical stepping.
And the destination.
Yes, the coffee shop at the end of the block. You freeze the continuous process of movement into 3 discrete components.
Okay, I can see how I do that with physical objects out in the world. But the sources argue we do this internally too, right? With our own perception.
Yes, this is Chapter 3, Perception. And it gets highly uncomfortable here. We apply the triadic delusion to our own senses. We invent a permanent perceiver, a little version of you sitting in a theater behind your eyes.
Like a little pilot in my head.
Yeah. Then we invent the act of perception, like an invisible beam traveling out from your eyes. And finally, we invent the independent perceived world sitting out there, static and waiting for you to look at it. We constantly violently divide the observer from the observed.
So when I look at a tree, I am artificially cutting the universe into me, my vision, and the tree. I'm drawing a hard boundary at my retina.
Yes. Now moving to Chapter 4, Composition. We look at physical reality and divide it into invisible parts, the action of composing those parts, and the macroscopic whole. We think the parts and the whole are separate, absolute realities.
It's like we can't just let things be a process. We have to dissect it.
Exactly. Chapter 5 is characterization. We split reality into the defining characteristic, the action of characterizing, and the characterized element. We separate the heat from the fire, conceptually.
What about our emotions? You mentioned we do this internally.
That's Chapter 6, concomitants. We slice our own internal psychology. We isolate a moment of consciousness, which we label the desirer. We then posit the relation of concomitants, the experiencing of the emotion, and finally the mental factor itself, the desire as a standalone thing. We treat our own mind as a collection of separate psychological atoms bouncing into each other.
I separate myself from my own feelings. I say I have anger as if I am a container, and anger is a fluid that was poured into me. I reify the emotion into a noun.
You add designation to the flow of your internal state. And Chapter 7 looks at composites. We project origination, duration, and cessation onto objects. We think an object is born, stays for a while, and then dies as three separate absolute phases.
Instead of a continuous, unbroken flow.
Right. And then Chapter 8 gets into ethics, karmic production. We divide a moral act into the actor, the mechanism of production, and the karmic result. We think we are a separate actor generating an independent result.
And because we have all these discrete moments and separate actions, we need something to tie them all together, don't we?
Yes, and that brings us to Chapter 9, pre-existent reality. In a desperate attempt to find continuity, to find a stable self that owns all these fragmented experiences, we posit a pre-existent continuum manager.
A continuum manager. That sounds like a middle management position in a corporate office.
It's the perfect description of what we think a soul or a core self is. We invent a cosmic manager whose only job is to stand outside the flow of time and own our karma, own our memories, and own our acquired aggregates, like our body and our thoughts. We desperately want someone to be in charge of the system.
We want the invisible mannequin to be real.
Exactly. And Chapter 10 uses a classic metaphor to illustrate how deeply flawed this is, the metaphor of fire and fuel.
Fire and fuel. Okay.
We look at a bonfire and we separate the cause, the wooden logs, from the dynamic action of burning and from the resulting fire itself. We think the fire and the wood are two different things interacting, but there is no fire independent of the burning wood, and there is no burning wood without the fire. It is a single, mutually co-arising event.
Just like our illusory self is entirely dependent on the fuel of our constant grasping thoughts.
You nailed it! And finally, Chapter 11 covers temporal limits. We chop the flowing, nonlinear reality of time into a rigid beginning, which we call the past, a middle, which we call the present, and an ending, which we call the future. We are terrified of infinity, so we artificially cap our experiences with beginnings and ends.
Wow. Okay, I'm going to push back here, or at least play devil's advocate for the listener who is trying to absorb this, because the scale of this illusion is almost impossible to hold in your head.
It's a lot to process.
Are you telling me that when I simply get in my car, back out of my driveway, and drive to the grocery store to buy milk, I am literally hallucinating the driver, the driving, and the store as separate things? I'm treating the universe like a giant bucket of cosmic Lego bricks.
That is precisely the analogy used by modern commentators when discussing these ancient psychological frameworks, specifically the Abhidharma traditions. It is known as the Lego brick fallacy.
A Lego brick fallacy.
Yeah. When you drive to the store, your mind falsely assumes that the actor, you, the driver, is a solid red Lego brick. The driving is a solid blue brick, and the result arriving at the grocery store is a solid yellow brick.
Okay.
You operate under the delusion that these are solid, independent pieces with their own inherent essence, and they simply snap together temporarily to form an event.
I am a red brick, the steering wheel is a blue brick. We snap together.
But the philosophical deconstruction we are exploring shatters this Lego mindset completely. In reality, none of those bricks exist independently. You cannot have a driver without the act of driving. If you are sitting in a parked car with the engine off, you are not a driver. You are just a person sitting in a metal box.
Right.
You cannot have the driving without a destination to drive toward. They do not exist in a vacuum. They do not sit on a shelf waiting to be assembled. They co-create each other the exact microscopic millisecond they interact.
That is a massive paradigm shift, and it perfectly sets up the crucial turning point of this deep dive. If these triads of separate solid objects, the subject, action, and object, are just a massive cognitive illusion built by a scared, edge-detecting brain, how does reality actually function? If there are no independent Lego bricks, what are we actually looking at?
If we peel away the dualistic conceptual proliferation, what we are looking at is a relational web.
A relational web.
The fundamental mechanics of reality operate through mutual co-arising and real-time karmic feedback loops. To prove that subjects and objects instantaneously co-create each other, rather than existing independently, the source materials offer some incredibly precise relational dependency metaphors.
I want to spend some real time on these metaphors, because unlearning the Lego brick mindset takes work. How do the sources explain mutual co-arising without using jargon?
The most profound and intuitive metaphor provided is the parent and the child. I want you to think about a man standing in a room. We can label him a human being, but the specific, profound identity and essence of a parent does not exist in a vacuum. A man cannot be a father all by himself.
Right, there has to be a child.
But look at the exact timing of it. The identity of the parent is co-created the exact microscopic millisecond the child takes its first breath. Before that breath, the child is a fetus, and the man is an expectant man. The very second the child enters the world as a child, the father simultaneously enters the world as a father.
Wow.
The parent and the child are mutually dependent concepts. One does not precede the other in that relational dynamic. They blink into existence simultaneously as a relationship.
That is beautiful. It completely destroys the idea of linear causality.
Yeah.
It's not that A causes B and B happens after A. It's that A and B define each other instantaneously.
Another metaphor used to illustrate this fragile interdependence is two sheaves of reeds leaning against each other. Imagine taking two bundles of tall grass and leaning them against each other so they stand upright in an inverted V shape.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
The actor, the action, and the object of reality are exactly like those reeds. They lean against each other to maintain their structure.
And if you pull one away,
The whole structure collapses. If you pull away the object of perception, let's say a mountain you are looking at, the entire identity of you as a mountain perceiver instantly collapses because there is nothing to perceive. The perceiver has no individual foundational core. It only exists in the leaning.
this totally dismantles the idea I mentioned earlier, the feeling that there is a little me sitting safely inside my head just watching the world on a movie screen.
And that brings us to one of the most vital metaphors in the text, the shadow and the light source. We have this deep-seated belief that the perceiver sits waiting in the dark behind our eyes, a permanent entity waiting for experiences to happen to it. But think about how a shadow works. A shadow doesn't exist in a dark room, sitting in the corner, waiting for someone to turn the light on so it can be revealed.
No, the shadow isn't a thing. The shadow is an event.
Exactly. The shadow is instantaneously co-created by the interaction of the light source and the physical object blocking the light. If the light moves, the shadow updates instantly. If the object shifts, the shadow contorts. The shadow has no independent existence. It is a real-time manifestation of a relationship.
That makes so much sense.
The you that is observing the world right now, the self you feel so fiercely protective of, is exactly like that shadow. It is instantly co-created and updated in real time by whatever environment, thought, or emotion you are interacting with.
A real-time update. So the me talking to you right now is a different relational shadow than the me who will be drinking a glass of water an hour from now. We are a process, a verb. The text also mentioned the dancer and the dance to explain this, right?
Yes. Try to pry a dancer apart from the act of dancing. If a woman is standing perfectly still waiting for a bus, she is not currently a dancer, she is a commuter. It is the exact moment the kinetic action of the dance begins that the agent, the dancer, comes into being. The identity of the agent is entirely dependent on the action.
You know, applying this framework of real-time updating totally redefines the concept of karma for me. In popular culture, karma is always talked about like it's a cosmic behavioral scoreboard. You cut someone off in traffic, and the universe puts a negative tally next to your name to punish you with a flat tire 3 weeks later.
Yeah, that's the Western misinterpretation.
But based on what you're describing, karma isn't a mystical scoreboard run by a continuum manager. It's a constant biological and psychological feedback loop.
That is a phenomenal synthesis. It is not a scoreboard, it is a centerless feedback loop of mutual updating. To explain how this loop generates our perceived reality, the sources provide a highly relatable dynamic metaphor. Imagine a person walking down a sidewalk who sees a golden retriever.
Okay, a normal, everyday scenario.
Now, let's say this person has past karmic conditioning. When they were a young child, they were severely bitten by a neighborhood dog. That past experience isn't a mystical tally mark, it has physically shaped their nervous system. Their amygdala is primed, Their neural pathways are wired for defense. That conditioning is the fuel.
The biological hardware is heavily biased.
Exactly. When the photons bouncing off that golden retriever hit the person's retina, their mind immediately, reflexively imputes a threat onto the animal. That perceived threat instantaneously spikes their cortisol, accelerates their heart rate, and generates a terrified self.
But the dog isn't doing anything.
Right. The dog isn't inherently objectively terrifying. To the dog's owner, the dog is pure love. And the person walking down the street isn't inherently permanently terrified. But in that exact moment, the conditioned observer and the visual trigger co-create a terrifying reality in a real-time loop.
The environment creates the mind, and the mind simultaneously shapes the environment. The boundary between internal and external is a complete illusion. It's totally porous.
It collapses entirely when you look closely enough. The texts use the metaphor of a farmer planting a seed to show this continuous loop.
How does that one work?
Well, a farmer alters the physical landscape of a field by planting wheat. The field, in turn, grows food. The farmer consumes that food, which literally alters their neurochemistry, provides calories to their muscles, and physically changes their biology. That new biological state then dictates the farmer's next action in the field, maybe giving them the energy to plant an orchard.
The farmer creates the farm, and the farm literally creates the farmer.
It is the Ouroboros, the ancient symbol of the snake eating its own tail. The result of any action immediately feeds backward to update the producer's conditioning. A conditioned producer performs an action, the action generates a result, and that result instantly rewires the producer for the next cycle.
So there's no prime mover.
There is no independent farmer standing outside the loop pulling levers. The farmer is the loop.
I want to apply this Ouroboros concept, this real-time updating, back to my earlier example of driving to the grocery store.
Yeah.
Because I remember the notes brought in the Ship of Theseus thought experiment to really hammer this home.
The Ship of Theseus is essential here. The classic philosophical puzzle asks, if you have a wooden ship and over a period of years you slowly replace every single rotting plank of wood, every sail and every mast until no original piece remains, is it still the same ship?
And our edge-detecting brains desperately want to say yes, because we crave the invisible mannequin of shipness.
We want the continuum manager.
Right.
But apply that to your 20-minute drive to the grocery store. During that drive, millions of your biological cells die and are replaced. Your blood chemistry radically shifts based on your stress levels in traffic. Your neural pathways physically adapt to the podcast you are listening to on the radio. You are literally being continually dismantled and reassembled by the journey itself. The goer at the origin, the person who backed out of the driveway, never actually survives unchanged to become the goer at the destination, stepping out of the car in the parking lot.
That is wild. And undeniably biologically true. I am literally a different cognitive and cellular entity walking into the grocery store than the one who started the car. The noun is a lie. I am entirely the process of driving.
You are a centerless flow of karmic updates, constantly adjusting to the terrain.
Okay, this brings up a massive, highly practical question. I think this is where the listener is going to demand some grounding. Because it's one thing to philosophize about the Ship of Theseus. But if the self and the world are completely empty of inherent existence, if everything is just a shape-shifting, mutually co-arising feedback loop.
Why does everyday life feel so stubbornly, incredibly real?
Exactly. Why do these artificial dualistic models we impose on the world actually work? If the physical wall is just an empty, interdependent illusion, why does it break my nose if I run into it?
That is the most important pushback you can offer, and it leads us directly into understanding the mirage of the conventional world. The frameworks we are studying do not fall into nihilism. They do not claim the world doesn't exist, or that your broken nose isn't painful.
They claim the world doesn't exist the way our edge-detecting brains think it does.
Right. So the models are wrong, but they are useful.
Useful illusions.
Exactly. Our dualistic conceptual models are far from ultimate reality, but they are relatively valid. They have conventional efficacy. To explain how something can be highly functional but ultimately empty of a solid core, the sources provide a series of brilliant physical metaphors. Let's start with the echo in a canyon.
An echo is a great example of an event that feels like a thing.
An echo functions perfectly in the conventional world. If you shout into a canyon, the returning echo has real physical efficacy. It vibrates your eardrums, it can trigger a rock slide, it can startle a flock of birds into the air.
It has an impact.
But if you try to reach out and grab the absolute independent core of that echo with your bare hands, you catch nothing but empty air.
because the echo doesn't exist on its own.
Right. It isn't an independent entity, it's an interdependent event, co-created by the vibration of your vocal cords, the density of the air, the geometry of the rock walls, and the distance. It is real, it functions, but it is entirely empty of an independent essence.
It's a relational nexus, just like us.
Consider another grounding metaphor, the mirage or the desert oasis. Imagine a traveler dying of thirst in the desert who sees a shimmering oasis of water on the horizon. The traveler begins to sprint toward it.
Okay.
The physiological exhaustion of that sprint is entirely real. The pain in their legs, the bleeding from tripping over a sharp rock, the elevated heart rate, that suffering is conventionally real and highly functional.
But the object driving the behavior is a phantom.
The solid object driving the very real behavior, the water, is an optical illusion created by heat and light refraction. This perfectly demonstrates how our dualistic concepts cause us suffering. The karma functions flawlessly, the cause and effect are real, but the system relies on our minds superimposing an absolute independent essence onto empty conditions. We run ourselves ragged, chasing mannequins.
And that leads directly to the brick wall and the broken nose. Because running into a wall isn't an optical illusion.
No, the physics are entirely real. If you sprint face first into a brick wall, the physical laws of kinetic energy, mass, and the pain signals firing in your nervous system function flawlessly. The philosophical illusion is not the pain. It's not that the wall isn't there in a conventional sense.
What is the illusion?
The illusion is your mind taking a temporary, fluid, impermanent cloud of interacting atoms and energy fields and forcefully superimposing an absolute, permanent, independent wallness onto it. You reify a temporary arrangement of matter into an eternal, solid enemy that just broke your nose. The suffering comes from believing the wall exists independently from the clay, the fire that baked the brick, the mason who laid it, and the gravity holding it in place.
Which brings up the hologram and the coffee cup.
Yeah.
This was the metaphor that finally made emptiness click for me. Because emptiness doesn't mean a black void. It actually means fullness. It means infinite connection.
Beautifully stated. In a true optical hologram, if you shatter the holographic plate, every single microscopic shard still contains the entire image of the whole.
Really? Every shard?
Every single one. The universe operates with that same holographic interdependence. Think about the coffee cup sitting on your desk right now. Your edge-detecting brain draws a box around it and says, that is a single, independent cup of coffee.
But it's not. It's a massive, sprawling web.
It is a relational nexus that implicitly contains the entire cosmos. To have that single cup of coffee sitting on your desk, you require the specific soil composition of a mountainside in Colombia. You require the rain cycles generated by the oceans. You require the physical labor of the farmer, the macroeconomic trade agreements between nations, the fossil fuels running the massive shipping freighter, and the gravitational pull of the sun that grew the bean.
You pull on a tiny thread called coffee cup, and you realize it's attached to the rest of the universe. The cup is empty of cupness, but it is full of the entire cosmos.
And when we look at vast human constructs, we see the exact same emptiness. Think of a massive trillion-dollar corporation like Apple. Well, what is Apple, really?
Well, it's not the CEO. I mean, if the CEO leaves, Apple still exists.
Right. And it isn't the physical glass ring building in Cupertino. It isn't the specific lines of code in your iPhone because those update every week.
So where is it?
Apple has no physical center. It is a conceptual overlay, an artificial model, placed upon a massive, dynamic, constantly shifting web of legal contracts, consumer behaviors, economic exchanges, and social actions.
Apple is a massive, incredibly powerful verb masquerading as a noun.
Exactly. And just like Apple, the self you fiercely defend every day is simply a conceptual overlay placed on a dynamic web of biological, psychological, and karmic actions.
Okay, this brings me to my final and perhaps most desperate question. All of this is incredibly profound. It shatters the Lego brick universe completely. But how do I actually live a human life with this knowledge?
That's the million-dollar question.
How do you expect me to go to work, deal with my frustrating boss, pay my mortgage, and raise my kids if everything is an interdependent holographic echo? If everything is a mirage, do I just sell all my possessions, sit on a cushion in an empty room, and detach from everything?
No, absolutely not. That would be falling into the trap of nihilism, which these sources strictly warn against. Realizing that the world is a co-created process doesn't mean you stop participating in the process. This raises the critical question of how to navigate the conventional world without being destroyed by it. And the sources offer one final, brilliant, highly modern metaphor to explain the state of being, the immersive video game.
Oh, I play a lot of video games, so I am ready for this.
Yeah.
Let's talk about something incredibly difficult, like Elden Ring.
Perfect. Elden Ring is a highly immersive, intensely difficult simulation. When you are sitting on your couch fighting a massive, terrifying digital dragon in that game, your biological responses are entirely real. Your heart rate genuinely spikes. Your palms sweat on the controller. Your pupils dilate.
Oh yeah, I get incredibly stressed out. The karma of the game is real to my nervous system.
You fiercely engage with the conventional rules of the simulation. You learn the dragon's attack patterns. You dodge, you strike, you strategize. But here is the crucial difference. When your character inevitably misses a dodge and gets incinerated by the dragon, your character dies on screen. But you do not suffer ultimate existential trauma on the couch.
Right, I don't call an ambulance for myself. I don't weep for the eternal loss of my digital avatar.
Because fundamentally, you know it's just a game.
I know it's not real life.
Because you never lose the underlying awareness that the dragon, the armor, the fire, and the landscape are co-created illusions made of code and pixels. You test the models within the game, you adapt them, and you use them to navigate the challenge and even experience joy, but you stop believing they are absolute objective reality. This is what the ancient texts call acting without acting.
Acting without acting, engaging fiercely with the conventional rules of the simulation. You pay the mortgage, you drink the coffee, you love your kids, and you dodge the dragon. But you do it without the absolute suffocating existential panic, because you know the code is just code.
The true danger of dualistic conceptual proliferation, this disease of reification we've been talking about, is forgetting you are holding a controller. It's believing the code is the ultimate truth. When you believe the dragon is an absolute independent reality, the suffering becomes unbearable. When you see it as a flowing, interdependent process, you can play the game of life with lightness, joy, and freedom.
This has been an absolutely staggering journey. Let's try to bring this massive architectural map together. We are biological creatures who evolved edge detection to survive on the savannah. But our higher reasoning glitched, and we started using that survival tool to mentally freeze the flowing, centerless river of reality.
We fell for the saccadic masking.
We did. We impose artificial, simplistic triads, slapping labels like subject, action, and object onto a limitless karmic flow. We've arbitrarily chopped a seamless universe up into a bucket of isolated Lego bricks across every domain of our lives.
We created the invisible mannequin, and we dressed it up in our own conceptual overlays.
But as we've explored today, while these conceptual models are testable, functional, and conventionally useful, they keep us alive, they build our cities, and they certainly break our noses, they are never reality as it actually is. Underneath the masks and the labels, reality is the echo in the canyon, is the Ouroboros. It is a real-time holographic feedback loop where the observer and the observed instantaneously co-create each other.
And realizing that isn't a loss of self, it is a profound liberation. It means you are not stuck. You are not a static noun trapped in a world of rigid objects. You are a fluid process, continually updating and redefining yourself in real time, completely intertwined with the rest of the cosmos.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought I want you to take with you as you go about the rest of your day. The next time you feel overwhelmed by a problem, a conflict, or a rigid definition of who you are supposed to be, I want you to remember the shadow and the light source. If the physical objects around you, your deepest emotions, and your very own identity are actually dependently co-arising mirages, updating in real time based on your environment and your conditioning, ask yourself this: how much of your daily stress, your deep anxiety, and your suffering is simply the immense, exhausting friction of trying to forcefully freeze a fluid, centerless cycle? What would happen if you put down the heavy burden of the invisible mannequin, stopped trying so desperately to be a noun, and finally just allowed yourself to be the verb?